Warning, major spoilers ahead for The Last of Us Parts 1 and 2. You have been warned. The Last of Us Part 2 is the most beautiful game I've ever played. The Last of Us Part 2 is the best evolution of gameplay in a video game sequel that I've ever witnessed. The Last of Us Part 2 has some of the best character moments I've ever seen in a video game. Yet, The Last of Us Part 2 tells the most disappointing story I've ever experienced. Before I begin, I would like to be upfront about my intentions in making this video. I will never bash this game for its representation and use of gay, trans, and female characters. In that respect, I think this game handled that subject matter beautifully. I will also never criticize Naughty Dog, a company I grew up with that has delivered many of my favorite video games of all time, just for the sake of it. As a lifelong Naughty Dog fan and Last of Us fan, I only aim to speak honestly about this game and voice my concerns surrounding it beyond many of the bigoted and petulant words being thrown around by others online. My views on this game are complicated to say the least, and I hope to explain in detail just why my views on this game remain largely negative. One of the hardest things to do in any fictional writing is to keep characters on a track while also keeping their actions and emotions consistent with their own moral compass. Some of the most creative scenarios and storytelling comes from first chapters and origin stories because the writer is still developing who the characters are and what kind of people they are going to be. After years of creative writing classes, student films, and my own contributions towards consuming and creating fictional stories, it is my belief that anyone is capable of imagining interesting and unique story ideas. But what separates any creative storyteller from a professional? Put simply, it's not just the writer's responsibility to create this world alongside interesting scenarios. A professional storyteller finds a way to use the world and scenarios to challenge the characters as they make decisions that not only move the story along, but develops and serve those characters' arcs. Both parts 1 and 2 of The Last of Us burst with creative, bold character moments and world building. The first game does this flawlessly in my opinion, and occasionally, Part 2 follows suit. But when does Naughty Dog's most ambitious project to date fail to succeed the first in a meaningful way? It's when these incredible creative story opportunities overpower the arc of the characters. The dissonance between the three playable characters' journeys and the message the game tries to tell makes for a disjointed and messy storytelling experience. The best way to explain it is by taking it one character at a time. Troy Baker's Joel is one of the best written and well-acted characters in gaming history, alongside Ashley Johnson's Ellie. We get to experience firsthand Joel's greatest loss, which leads into his growth as a bitter, ruthless survivor. He's often capable of brutal, murderous acts that leave him as the antagonist to many survivors in this world. In a way, that never changes. What does, however, is his redemption through his journey with Ellie. While we see and experience Joel come to love Ellie much like a surrogate father, we also never see him shake the sins of his past. He uses the knowledge gained from killing innocent people and being the bad guy over the years in order to defeat the odds in delivering Ellie to the Fireflies. He doesn't fall for traps because at one point he set them. He knows how to find Ellie because he's tortured for much less before. He kills Marlene in the end, knowing full well she could come after him for revenge. Joel is only capable of all this because of the dark, twisted wisdom garnered from his past. In short, he's only capable of being the protagonist of our game because of his 20 years of being the antagonist in the apocalypse. With many years compounded with Joel making enemies, it naturally makes sense that eventually his past would catch up to him. In fact, I predicted it would happen in the sequel, and that was okay with me, until I witnessed his death firsthand. In a world where Joel beats the odds not by strength alone, but through wit, what compels him and Tommy to walk directly into a den of a group of strangers? The writers do. You could argue that they have to go there due to the blizzard, that's valid, but what compels them to let their guard down as they do it? Again, the writers. This whole time, Neil Druckmann had it set in his mind that Joel had to die. Not only that, but that the death had to be brutal. He had to evoke an emotion in us, the player, that would anger us to the point of starting Ellie's quest for revenge. This sounds powerful and all, until you realize that he forgot about Joel here. Character deaths are a tried and true way to propel other characters into a new arc. And while that always works to inspire the character that must embark on their journey, it can also come at the cost of undermining the dead character's journey up to that point. A great example of this comes from Vince Gilligan's Breaking Bad, specifically the character Hank Schrader. Hank has spent 5 whole seasons tracking down Heisenberg at the expense of his career, his health, and his family, only to find out that the antagonist in his story this whole time was his very own brother-in-law. In the penultimate episode, titled Ozymandias, Hank and Walt are at war to outsmart one another at any cost. Hank loses not only the fight, but his life in the process. Hank's final actions and words symbolize his growth up to this moment, the arc being that survival is not as important as doing the right thing, juxtaposing Walt, who is willing to survive no matter the cost. In that sense, Hank had to die in order to complete his arc, otherwise any deal or maneuver to escape would have made him no better than the Heisenberg he opposed. It's a brutal yet heart-wrenching death that never gets easier to watch. Yet, none of that comes at the expense of the character. It actually only works to serve it. So, Joel Miller dies at the beginning of The Last of Us Part 2 to propel Ellie on her quest for revenge. What he doesn't get from that is closure for his actions to save Ellie. We don't get him fighting the way he had countless other times before to survive. We don't even get to help him fight for his life, even if that still resulted in his death. Instead of anything serving the character here, I got to see one of my favorite characters in media of all time get senselessly beaten into a bloody pulp because of mistakes he's too smart to make in the first place. This mistake merely exists to develop other people's arcs at the cost of not concluding his own in a way that makes sense for that character. For a series that prides itself on putting the player on the controller in difficult moments that allow us to have a stake in the character's journeys, removing the attempt to try and save Joel's life, hopeless as it may need to be, was a nail in the coffin for this poorly choreographed death sequence. Did it make me cry? Yes. Did it do its job at getting Ellie and I mad to go and seek out revenge? Hell yes. Did it serve Joel's character in the slightest? No. No, it didn't. Abby might be one of the most controversial characters in gaming since the release of Part 2. I was even conflicted with her, and that's from someone who threw her off a building 25 times in a row shortly after regaining control of her for the first time. Why do I feel so conflicted on Abby as a character? The game intends for the player to walk a mile in her shoes, to see the pain Joel and the world has inflicted on her, and come to understand why she did what she did. In the end, Druckmann wants you to develop empathy for Abby by the end of the story. I'm conflicted on how I feel about Abby and her journey, not because of empathy, however, but because of the incredible and deep characters she's surrounded by, as well as the game-changing events we play through as her. It's this limitless creativity into the unknown that features the most jaw-dropping and stunning moments of Part 2, especially in comparison to Ellie's first half by-the-book's lackluster journey for revenge. In Abby's shoes, I empathized with characters like Owen, Mel, this cute puppy, Lev, and Yara. I was stunned with what it was like to play as a single person stuck between two very diverse and creative factions that are at war with each other. I was floored by just how creative and scary Infected could be in this world, keeping me on the edge of my seat the entire playthrough. Yet all of this was undercut by one thing. Abby killed Joel, and that was inexcusable. That may sound close-minded to you, and that's because it is. Despite one of my favorite actors in video games and a literal role model, Troy Baker, telling us to go into this with an open mind, I just couldn't forgive Abby for killing Joel, no matter who I saw her lose or save, no matter how long I spent with her. By the end of the game, I still wanted her dead, and honestly, so did Ellie. But the writers didn't, so she lived. One of my favorite moments from the first game comes from the final chapter just before the epilogue, when you as Joel fight your way up through the hospital filled with fireflies to save Ellie. In the operating room, Ellie is on the table. You confront a doctor who stands between you and your goal. He wields a knife threatening not just you, but also that little girl that's grown into becoming like a daughter in this crusade to save the world at any cost. The cost is too high for Joel, and as Joel, you kill that doctor. In addition, you have the choice to kill the other two doctors in that room. I do every time. Maybe a little too harshly. Running through the hospital with Ellie in your arms is one of the most powerful moments I've ever played through, not because I had any real choice in the matter, but because I felt like I did. Joel and I were in agreement that we had to save Ellie at all costs. That's not because the writers alluded that we should kill those doctors. It's because I wanted to. Joel wanted to. I became Joel here, and if the Lord somehow gave me a second chance to do it all over again, say a New Game Plus option, I wouldn't change a thing. That is where the greatest flaw in Abby's journey lies. It's not what everyone says, like she's too jacked, she's a stale character, her journey isn't interesting. None of that, I believe, is a valid criticism. In fact, in parts, it's the strongest part of the journey. Say, in fact, we followed Abby from the very beginning without the experience of the first game, I'm sure I'd feel more positive about who she is and the things she's done to survive. But we didn't follow her from the beginning. We followed Joel and Ellie. Abby and I aren't on the same page when she kills Joel like Joel and I are in the hospital scene. This cruel and unforgivable act stuck with me throughout the entirety of Part 2 in a way that was definitely not intended. Where Druckmann intends to create an expanse that the player must overcome and bridge across to connect with Abby, he instead builds a wall that prevents me from investing in her character until the bitter end. He banks on the hope that he can get you to care for Abby by playing as her for the last half of the game. I don't think he realized just how wide that gap was, or just how much of an ask it was to forgive Abby for killing Joel. Ellie is definitely not the same little girl from the first game. She's grown up and hardened by the world and the lies told to her by the person she trusted the most. The ending of Part 1 leaves us with amazing plot threads that ask interesting questions for Part 2. The best of which, what does this mean for Joel and Ellie's relationship? Unfortunately, that relationship isn't shown much in the sequel. But it does generate some of the best portions of Part 2. The flashback segments such as the dinosaur museum, Joel and Ellie clearing out Infected on the way to a music store, Ellie finding out the truth at St. Mary's Hospital, These segments are the best in the game by far, as they develop the characters and the relationship we care about from the first game, challenge it in ways that are unexpected yet make sense for those characters, and still presents Joel and Ellie in ways that made us care about them in the first place. It's powerful, especially in the context that their time together is about to be cut short. These memories are hands down the only flawless aspects of this game. If you've seen the ending, then you'll know it ends on one of those flashbacks. The scene itself is flawless to me, yet as an ending, it does little to justify Ellie's questionable decision to save Abby, and is a disservice to Joel and Ellie's relationship. One of the major selling points for this game for many was continuing the adventure as Ellie. Despite my anger in how Joel's death was handled, despite my disinterest in playing as Abby at all, the first half when playing as Ellie in her journey to seek revenge mechanically in the story is awesome and exactly what all of us were sold on when buying the game from the start. However, narratively, this unfortunately also left a lot to be desired. First off, most of the wolves are killed off-screen by Tommy, except for 3, one of which is killed off-screen by Ellie. With this, Ellie's quest for revenge is narrowed down to about 2 bad acts of revenge over the course of a nearly 20-hour game, which is unfortunately again cut in half by Abby hogging up the playtime. The only thing keeping me engaged through all this, however, is the hope to kill Abby at the end in the same way I killed her dad. This led to the most disappointing narrative decision I've seen in any story, the safest option and one I called a mile away. This whole journey, the thing that kept me through to the end, was the hope that Ellie would kill Abby. But when Ellie gets her chance, even after losing some fingers in the final fight, Ellie lets Abby go. For the first time ever in a video game, Ellie and I were in agreement about what had to be done, just as Joel and I were in part 1. Yet the writers took away their final chance in serving Ellie's character and the player with a safe and unsatisfying ending. Yes, some players may have grown to love Abby over the latter half of the game, but Ellie didn't. In fact, Ellie didn't see any of that. This game is bold in its decision to have us play equally as the protagonist and the antagonist in their similar quests for revenge. One of the greatest examples of this, I think, fulfilled this idea in a way was controlling Abby as she fought Ellie in the theater. I felt dread, hoping and wishing that I didn't kill her or presumably harm Ellie by my own hands. They used mine and Abby's disconnected agenda to keep the tension high, yet, while effective, still doesn't make me care for Abby. Her killing Jesse and permanently scarring Tommy instead continues to build up this wall against me and her character, making me want to kill her even more. What isn't bold about this game is saving Abby after we as the player get to spend half the game with her. Ellie comes to the same conclusion that the writers want us to come to over the course of an entire game, that Abby should live. But Ellie never has a moment where she sees the good in Abby. Ellie never gets to know the extent of what Abby has been through like we do. She sacrificed everything, even her happily ever after, just to kill this girl. So why does Ellie pass up her chance? Because she remembers Joel? Joel, given the chance, would have tortured Abby for killing Ellie. So is it that she doesn't forgive Joel for his actions? No, she obviously finds a way to move past that in her quest for revenge. Ellie goes against everything she's become, everything she's worked for, everything she's been through, and we've been through with her. Not because her mind has changed, not even because our mind as the player has changed, but because Neil Druckmann decided that Abby was worth saving. If the player and the writers disagree, the story can never work for you. However, if you do like Abby, that's the only way this story can be saved. As I've said, for a game series that prides itself in putting the gamer in control of the story, this fails to give it to us in the most crucial parts in fear that we won't agree with its message. The first game is still talked about today because we as gamers, as Joel, cleared the hospital, killed those doctors, and carried Ellie out of that hospital. The first game is still talked about today because despite our actions, we have to live with them not only as Joel and Ellie, but as the player. In The Last of Us Part 2, we get more control than ever before, except in the parts where it mattered most. We killed countless underdeveloped characters, enemies, but we have no control in killing any of those involved in Joel's murder. We spend Part 1 not only living, but surviving as Joel, only to have him killed off in a way that doesn't line up with his character, only existing to serve other characters' arcs. We spend 20 hours working our way to Abby to kill her by our own hands, only to have that chance ripped from the controller at the most pivotal moment. The problem with The Last of Us Part 2 isn't that it dared to be different. In many ways, that evolution of the world exceeded my high expectations. The problem with The Last of Us Part 2 is that the story doesn't resonate with me as the player. The development of characters isn't effective for me as the player, and the conclusion goes against what me, the player, played through 20 hours to do. I think Naughty Dog knew that despite their best efforts, many would still want Abby dead. I think they knew despite our whole journey, Ellie would still want Abby dead. That's why we weren't given the chance in Joel or Ellie's most pivotal moments in this game. Those events had to happen for the ball to roll on Ellie's journey and whatever Druckmann wants to do with Abby in Part 3. Neil wrote the story around these events that needed to take place, around what he believed the moral of the game should be, and around what emotions he wanted to evoke in us, the player. The fatal flaw in all this is that Neil forgot to serve the characters or the players in that process. I've seen many perfect scores for this game. I've seen many dreadful scores for this game. What I want to hit home on is this. I don't believe this is a bad video game. In fact, when it comes to gameplay, it's the best I've ever experienced. This game looks astonishing, being the best visuals I've ever seen in a video game. But The Last of Us Part 1 never became acclaimed for its revolutionary gameplay or graphics. On the contrary, it became beloved for its stories and its methods to immerse you in that story. In my opinion, the sequel failed on that front. Let me know what you think in the comments down below. What do you think about The Last of Us Part 2? Do you think they could have done anything to improve upon it? Or if you disagree with me, why do you think it succeeded? Please keep it civil, as we all have a right to our own opinions. If you like this video format, please subscribe, and I'll see you next time. Take care.